it's me again. And I've had quite a few requests about the Apache oil and gas company's asset from 2016, the Alpine High. And there's been some FUD this week that resurfaced about Alpine High, and they like to bring it up because of its similarity, I guess, to Torch in terms of the oil that they found. Not so much the gas, but this is in terms of the oil that they found, although the gas is a separate matter in itself, I think. But there are some similarities to that in regards that it happened around-ish the same time. And again, the oil beyond that is where I say the similarities will end, and it becomes two different delineated stories in itself if you look into this. I hope you're ready for quite the ride. Again, I took some light notes. You know, I have about 6 pages, so light notes. I like to be prepared for these things. I know some people complain about not being able to read my notes, but I have chicken scratch handwriting, and you wouldn't expect any less from the bird lady. I'm left-handed. I have chicken scratch. As I've gotten older, my handwriting's gotten substantially worse because I don't have time for neat handwriting when you're just, you know, quickly transcribing stuff. Hence, it's just like a doctor. I would blend right in. Well, let's get into it. So, Alpine High was the name of this play from the Apache Oil and Gas Company. They founded it in 2016, and the geologist who is credited with it was Stephen Keenan. Alpine High had many advantages. It was located in the southern Delaware Basin. That's the southwest Delaware Basin in Reeves County, largely. Some Pecos County. Think of Picante, Pecos. We're in El Paso, Picante. Okay, we love Texas loves that commercial. We love it. It was in Reeves County, and the property featured an estimated 3 billion barrels of oil and 75 trillion cubic feet of gas, which made me go, like Tim Allen. This came at the time of 2016 when the USGS was surveying current active areas. So they were surveying more or less the Midland, not so much the Delaware, but mostly the Midland. USGS was also resurveying the Marcellus, the Barnett, the Oklahoma, Occidental, Anadarko play area, the Bakken Shale in the Dakotas, Montana, southern Canada. They were all surveying that, and the Marcellus Shale has about 75 trillion cubic feet of gas left estimate. With current technology that we have, that doesn't count what's taken out or what might be truly possible. That's basically what's easily accessible according by USGS standards. I actually went over this a bit in my Texas shale oil drilling history video. I sort of briefly talked about it. The Barnett Shale, where I live, had about 50 trillion cubic feet of gas left. Where I live is right on the cusp of like the oil and gassy area. If you move slightly west, you get into oil. If you move north, you're into the gas land. So, to say that this little pocket had 75 trillion cubic feet of gas and it's the whole size of the Marcellus is interesting. This didn't include the Utica, which is basically the downslope of the Marcellus. Marcellus is more upslope, into the Appalachian uplift, and then the Utica is more of the downslope into the valley. I talked about the Llano uplift with the Barnett Shale, how where I am, it's a bit higher. The gas will often hit the water table. Sometimes they mix, it's not good. Makes your water not potable then. Luckily, where I live, the water table is high enough where it's okay. and it's conified enough where there's nothing permeating into the water table. I know these are big words. Basically, it's sealed off where I live in my particular water table on the Trinity Aquifer. That's where my water table is. I'm off the Trinity Aquifer. But it's conified enough, it's high enough where things aren't seeping into it. That's what I mean by permeable. Okay. So if you look at the geology, the Alpine High play was on the east end of the Diablo Plateau. So it was on the higher end of the Diablo uplift provided by this picture, which shows, yes, it's on the higher end of the Diablo uplift. The further east you go down until you get to Contra Valley, until you hit eventually, the Edwards Plateau. If you keep going east, you'll eventually hit the Edwards Plateau. But that's quite a few hundred miles away. Consequently, this is also quite a few hundred miles away from the Orogrande, which is on the other side of the Diablo Plateau. Okay, when it was discovered, it had a net present value, they estimated, of $4 to $20 million per well, based on $50 a barrel of oil and $3 per 1,000 cubic feet. That was the net present value per well that could be put on the property, estimated. At the time when they more or less were doing this, oil was not profitable enough for them to do it. In 2016, the cost to drill their lateral wells was about $4 million a piece. And as you can see, the NPV was $4 to $20 million. And if they ran into something pressurized, of course, it gets higher. As a result, it wasn't economically quite feasible for them to drill. This sort of reminds me of the Orogrande. Here's where it's similar, because there are highly pressurized areas of the Orogrande. Of course, that does add to costs. Now, keep in mind, this is 2016. Drilling technology has come a long way since 2016. Drilling technology has come a long way since, 2003. Fracking technology has evolved leaps and bounds since 2003 to 2022. It's developed quite quickly. Drilling technology, petrophysics, imaging technology has come a long way. I will say that. As far as I know and I can study, there's only been one main geologist on there. Torchlight had two. They had Masterson and Zabrowski. Then they wind up getting a third independent review, which is stimulation petrophysics. If you'd like to know what petrophysics look like, I will show you on these slides. We can do some porosity imaging. We can do some rock fractal imaging. We can do impedance testing, seismic testing. You can do a whole bunch of stuff, and the imaging technology and the seismic technology only has gotten better with years. The NPV, again, it seems like Torch, but now we're at an economically feasible time with oil. When they called it quits, that's like right when COVID started. So that's, I think, rather interesting how they called it quits, like right at the beginning of COVID. And the whole talk about shutdowns, that's actually right about the talk late February when they were talking about shutting down. They might have just called it quit to go focus on other things. Again, like their offshore Suriname and Egypt. I'll get into that. The pros and cons of that. I think something happened that we're not seeing here. So what happened? All of a sudden, the geologist, Mr. Stephen Keenan, quits the company. He says it was unrelated to Suriname. Okay. They did announce that they're going to Suriname, and then they sort of call it quits on Alpine. And then, they're going to Suriname, and the main geologist walks off, and then they're like, oh, we're killing production on the Alpine High play. Our geologist left. Is it because they couldn't find the oil without the geologist? I know some companies actually do have a difficult time finding oil. And they do have to bring on specific geologists for them to work. It's much an art form as it is scientific. You can look at the scientific data, but there's still largely an art form at the whole wildcatting and, witching. If you're in water, it's called witching. Defined water well. It's very much an art form still. Some people are very talented at it. Some people are not. It's like a sixth sense. Some people will tell you. Some companies have to wait to get specific geologists. I'll cite Zabrowski with Torch and the Balkan Shale. After Torchlight, Zabrowski had to go back to the Balkan Shale because people wanted him, as he's very good at where to drill and hit the oil. This could have been the case. However, why couldn't they hire some other in-demand geologist who would know? I think something else is going on here. Usually, the economy, right, at that time. I know economy is easy to blame it on, but look at, like, the cost of drilling the wells, and, we can go to other cheaper plays. Why did Alpine decide to go to offshore drilling, which is a bit more expensive? Answer, while all of a sudden they focused on other countries and offshore drilling. They couldn't hire on a new geologist. They decided to call it quits and go focus on other areas. They still have quite a bit of Permian plays if you look into this. Now, Stephen Keenan came from a company, EOG Resources, which, funny enough, bought property in Texas and the Oklahoma Panhandle from Occidental back in 2003. Which I find very funny because in 2006, Occidental turned around and just bought all the Anadarko property. It was one of the biggest company acquisitions, which I find very interesting. They sold it to EOG. They were like, oh, maybe we made a mistake. And then they turned around and a few years later came back to it. Of course, we're back to where oil is, where it's at record highs. It hasn't been this high since 2008. Last time oil was this high was 2008. Granted, gas prices weren't this high in 2008. Inflation, this is coupled with inflation at a 40-year high. Inflation 14 years ago, even with the economic crisis, wasn't quite this high. We're back to Reagan-era inflation. I don't know if you remember when houses were about 15% interest rate, like the mortgages on houses back in the early 80s was about 15%. So the Reagan-esque era is, inflation, maybe interest rates will go up. Who knows? That's not my area of expertise. Let's go to something that more or less is my area of expertise, emissions. Oil rigs. So you have, I've talked about it before, sour oil and sweet oil. You want sweet oil, but there are some sour oils. Even WTI has sour patches. This is why my driller friend that I had here the other day, I posted pictures of him in all this respirator gear because of the sourness. What causes sourness in oil is sulfur. The higher the sulfur content, the more sour and corrosive the oil is. The lower the sulfur content, the more sweeter and favorable the oil is. That's why you want light oil, which is low in sulfur. You want sweet oil, which is light oil. Louisiana light, Louisiana sweet, West Texas sweet. This is why you hear sweet. And if you watch that movie, There Will Be Blood, he asks about the sulfur content in the oil. Somehow this kid who is in the country knows enough about geology and sulfur where he can tell you it's low. Where did the kid get that oil tested for sulfur content? It's that I always found that plot hole rather interesting in There Will Be Blood. The kid, Paul. That was the kid's name, Paul. Paul comes to Daniel and he talks about how the oil just comes out of the ground. And they ask about alkali and sulfur content in the oil. And the kid, knew these terms. A country kid out in the middle of the desert, of Southern California. So we have sulfur content. If oil is sour, you're going to find hydrogen sulfide gas. Let's look at OSHA about hydrogen sulfide gas. It's actually a big problem. Where my friend was, there was quite a bit of hydrogen sulfide gas. But they were working for Discovery. He worked for a drilling company. This company was working for Discovery, which at the time was trying to explore the various plays and how you could get around this hydrogen sulfide gas. It made the job extremely dangerous. There's quite a few exposures and deaths to hydrogen sulfide gas, more than what you would think. My friend, where he had to wear a hydrogen sulfide detector around his neck, and if it got around, I would say 40 parts per million, it would start to beep. Of course, you know, it can be fatal at 500 parts per million. Some of these wells showed 3,000 parts per million. Let's cite the OSHA. Toxic hazards associated with hydrogen sulfide exposure are serious at well sites. Many fatalities have occurred. Maintain strict diligence to prevent and control exposure. Hydrogen sulfide gas is very flammable and will ignite at concentrations in the air between 4% and 46%. Refer to the NIOSH Pocket Guide and the safety standards as ANSI. A byproduct, NIOSH, by the way, has like the strictest standards of all the safety regulations. A byproduct of this combustion, hydrogen sulfide, is toxic sulfite gas. Sulfite will most likely present when there is a fire or explosion involving hydrogen sulfide. This comes from the combination. This is called an oxidation. So you have, in chemistry, you have an oxidation, which is a combustion reaction. Okay, here's the chemical equation. This isn't balanced. If you balance it out and through the magic of editing, ta-da! Okay. Whew, that took a while. You know, once you balance it out, now we have on either side of the equation, you know, we have 4 hydrogens, and now we have, here's 2 sulfurs, and you do the math, 2 times 2 is 2 sulfurs, 3 times 2 is 6 oxygens, and then we have 2 times 1 is 2 oxygens, plus the 2 times 2, which is 4, which is 6. It all equals out. So when you do the combustion equation, you have this. This is the actual chemical equation that occurs when hydrogen sulfide gas catches on fire. This is the recipe to bake that cake. Again, chemistry, I was terrible at chemistry. It took me a very long time to figure out how to do that. It took, you know, some people that comes very easily too. And some people, some things come hard too. For me, that's like the hardest thing to do. It takes a long time just to figure out how to do this. You have to look at it in terms of like a recipe. That's how I do it. Think of it in terms of a recipe. And here's where people go, oh my gosh, roller pigeons, bird lady. Oil's terrible. Why are we doing this? This is such a dangerous thing. Let's go to geothermal. It's so much safer. Do you see this equation? This is like what's going to cause all the OSHA and fatalities in geothermal too. Anytime you're drilling rather deep into the earth, you're going to encounter some hydrogen sulfide, and there's going to be risks of overexposure to people, even through your organic vapor respirators. The maximum capacity. Respirator can only block so much gas. This is like the main thing when you do geothermal, by the way, is this actual equation, is the hydrogen sulfide exposure and the rate of the possibility of combustion. There's a lot of friction when you drill. There's these risks, right? And this is going forward with the geothermal movement. I see a lot of people, which is good. This is going to be like your primary concern with emissions in geothermal, with dangers in geothermal, is this right here. So don't shrug this off as being only an oil thing. You know, no lunch is completely free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You're going to have to pay that lunch somehow. But yeah, this, like I said, don't forget this equation. This is going to be very prevalent going forward as geothermal becomes more favorable in terms of energy. To call it quits, either I think the company, you know, could have been struggling financially as this came about a rather difficult time, and they decided to go overseas where the labor costs can be much less. There's also less regulations overseas. Again, it depends on the company. See, here's where I think why did they start to focus on offshore? Offshore oil drilling is really, if Apache was having economic difficulties with Alpine High, and then they go to Suriname, where drilling's a bit more expensive, but the labor is less, and the regulations are less, and the safety standards are quite less. That makes me wonder, why couldn't they hold on to it? They had a big company to run, yes. Torchlight was a bit different. They're an exploration company, but they could sit on the property and wait for the market to come to them. And this is one of the reasons, too, why they merged with Meta specifically. So they had a couple companies to choose from. Listed, they had a few companies to choose from to get uplisted on the NASDAQ. Meta was the company that said, yes, take your time with selling the Orogrande to get maximum value. Meta, that was part of the contingency. Meta allowed them to actually do with the Orogrande to get that maximum value. The other companies that they had looked at were not really as techy. They were more minerals and or waste disposal companies, which wanted them to quickly offload the asset for the Orogrande, and they were not going to sell at that time for pennies on the dollar. That would have been, you know, late 2020, early 2021. I would say McCabe, more than anybody, wants maximum value on this. He's quite the big stakeholder. They're not going to sell for pennies on the dollar. That's one of the contingencies of the merger with a new company, and that's why they chose Meta. Meta was fine with them dealing what they wanted with the oil and gas assets. It seems like Apache was in a bit more of a hurry for some reason to offload these assets. The geologist left, and then they decided, oh, yeah, it's full of gas. We're walking away. Granted, gas time low. It was full of gas, right? More gas than oil. What kind of gas are we talking about? My dog, by the way, is... he comes in here demanding for attention. What kind of gas? Are we talking natural gas? Granted, the natural gas market was in a low, and it really wasn't feasible. Or are we talking hydrogen sulfide gas too? That could have been a type of gas that they were encountering. It's very prevalent in some areas not. Some areas, yes, and that's why PPE is very big, and monitors and exposures. And even then, there's still a lot of issues. You can wait for the market to come to you, and now the market has come to us. The market is here to us. We're at like a great time in terms of selling this asset. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I will see you soon. Goodbye.